Well, thank you so much for joining me here, Mac. I am absolutely stoked to introduce you to the 424 audience and share everything that you're doing. You're a creative beast, and you've really changed the recovery podcast space. Like you're doing something very, very unique that I don't see a lot of other podcasters doing in the sober recovery space. I would love for you to share a bit about yourself and your journey with podcasting. And then I want to get into this project that you are working on, season 3 right now, right? Yeah. Okay, let's talk about it.
So my name is Katie Mack. I go by Mac. I don't just call myself Mac because I'm not like Beyonce or Madonna. I'm not like single named status yet. But everyone who knows and loves me, including you, calls me Mac. So that's the first thing. If you want to be my friend, let's start off that way. But in 2020, I released season 1 of Fucking Sober, the first 90 days. And it was an attempt to give me something that I needed when I had started to get sober multiple times. So my history with recovery is that I'm a intravenous drug user. I always coupled everything with drinking. And I had been cleaned from kind of the heavier side of drug things since 2011. And then I tried to get sober from alcohol and I just like couldn't do it. And it was just kind of crazy actually. So in 2017, I remember like standing on a platform waiting for a train, trying to listen to podcasts, and podcasts weren't nearly as cool as they are now. And there was a couple of really good ones out there. Dopey is a really great example. Like, we love Dopey. I think as a community, it's like the pinnacle of like really awesome ex drug users or drug users coming on and talking about their experiences through the sort of like tongue in cheek lens, which we just love. But I was listening to kind of like really positive podcasts about like, yes, you too can do it. And I was like, shut up. I couldn't listen to people who were doing it well tell me how to do it well. And I couldn't do it in the rooms and I couldn't do it on a podcast and I couldn't do it at all. I was so agitated all the time. That led me to start writing a narrative piece about a girl who was not doing well, but doing it anyway.
Mm.
And that's where Fucking Sober came in. I am an actor and a playwright, and I have lived in the world of playwriting for a very long time. I've created a handful of solo shows and two-person shows, mostly because they're financially sound. And I would make them through the lens of a personal experience and then try to like doctor it up to make it a little bit more interesting. And that's what Fucking Sober is. So I came up sort of with this formula. I wanted it to be a narrative podcast because I grew up listening to like This American Life, and I am a theater person. And I also, of course, love this and the interview style. But I really wanted something that someone could reflect on in their own time. And so I thought podcasting was a very personal experience. It was also financially sound. And I could have the listener passively have an experience, either rooting for the character or hoping the character falls down a well, and then possibly, hopefully, reflect on their own relationship with alcohol. And it sort of honors the AA. The beginner is the most important person in the room. So we talk about the first 90 days. I think in the most quiet moments, even now, I wonder if you relate with this. Somebody who's sort of in the middle space of being sober curious, maybe looking at their relationship with alcohol, I'll see this really interesting moment where someone will sort of say to me like, but like how? And like they're not being funny or like an asshole or anything. They're being really sincere, like how, but how do you stop drinking? And I don't know if there's like a really great answer. I think obviously it's going to be personal for every person. And so my way of wanting to answer that is to show one person's experience of how. And I talk about mine. And so I wanted it to be a limited series, an 8-episode limited series, and of the first 90 days. And then I wanted to move on from there. I wanted to hear more stories. The main purpose of making season 1 was so I could practice. I didn't know how to make a podcast. I didn't know how to sound design. I didn't really know how to make an 8-episode series. I didn't know how to do any of this. And the pandemic afforded me some space to really reflect on it. But the most important thing for me was to make season 1 so I could make other seasons. And so that's where this leads in. We started to write season 2 with a writer called Cynthia Wright. We have not finished that episode. At the same time, we had sort of attracted this other person named Kimberly Kearns. And out of this, she had just had a couple days, maybe the first 90 days of being sober, and had found herself a lot of free time. And I basically dove in, I think really replaced her drinking with the writing. And so, capitalizing on that, we ended up making a second season called Betsy. And that is Fucking Sober season 2. And that sort of addresses like mommy wine culture in white, affluent Boston suburbs. And we got a chance to recreate Fucking Sober. And for me, the coolest thing about Fucking Sober is that it really is one person's story. Again, it's fictionalized in some way. So we're sort of talking about this character that's having real life situations. And the mission is sort of steeped within the podcast, which is uh every single creative team member has their own story with recovery. So all the music that is underscored within the podcast is from musicians who are either in recovery or know somebody who is like has a history with dealing with people in recovery that they love. Every single voiceover artist, the writers themselves, the associate producing team, and of course myself. And that to me underlines the mission that like we all can recover. And when we do, we're not just like in a state of blissful recovery. We are like making something, we are becoming something, we are trying to do something. And I think that's also some of the big fear of like after you first get sober, like, well, what now?
Yeah.
And that there's you can have another identity around being in recovery. So that leads me to we created this thing and that was really cool. And then we won this really big award. We
Yes.
won something called a Webby in 2021 for best limited series. And we beat out like Oprah or something. I don't know, like something crazy. A lot of podcasting now has a lot of money behind it. We are very indie, literally funded kind of AA style, passing the basket, $5, $10 donations from people who resonated with. The idea is like, you like what you heard, please throw $5 in the virtual basket kind of vibe. And that's been the idea is that it continues to be that way. Indie, self-produced, and that we can make it the way that we want to make it. And that brings us to season 3.
Yes. I'm so excited. I just want to go back a little bit because what you do is so unique and so cool. I love how you have created this really as a collaboration with people all over the US and Canada. Hi. I was one of the voices on there. I think that is so
So
cool.
good.
So how was that your vision when you were first starting Fucking Sober? Was it like, I want people from everywhere to just like be a part of this? And what is it like piecing all that together? Because everyone has like different sound equipment and experience doing voiceover, I'm imagining. Like what is
It's
that
such a
like?
good question. I knew that the writing had some it was more or less solid-ish, right? I was telling a story and it was cohesive, great. But the glue for me was when I was like, oh, I need other people to be a part of it. I don't, and then it was like, who are these people and how am I going to find them? And I was like, oh, it's other people in recovery because there are so many of us. And I just fucking love people in recovery. They are so resourceful. They're so funny. They're so like excited and interesting, personable, like love to share and be a part of a thing. And they're my people.
Mm.
And so as soon as I realized that all the voiceover artists and all the music were going to come from people who either had their own story with recovery or were in recovery themselves, again, across there is no right way to recover. So sort of that across the gamut, that's when I was like, oh, I have a show now. It's
Mhm.
sort of like, I know, it's sort of like, I don't know, choosing, I don't the right emblem for a business. You're like, that's it. Or like putting on the right outfit. You're like, damn, that feels good. And as soon as I knew that was going to be it was going to be harder, but that was the meat and potatoes of it.
Mhm.
And that also, man, like, making stuff as a creative person is lonely. And I needed to make it with people who are smarter, better looking, more talented than me. And so I got to do that. You just get to shine the light, which is very cool. Um, and then like I got to, again, sort of the baseline belief system around paying your people is not a lot of money by any means, but sort of the idea that like, thank you for your time and energy has been really something that has been very special to me.
Mhm.
And then I think the thing I really rely on is as a sound designer and producer for this whole thing, you have to have a deadline and then you have to just take what you get and you
Yeah.
make something with it. So if somebody has like really bad recording equipment, how can you make it work with the sound? And if you can't, then you just hope the audience forgives you.
Yeah.
You can like work on being perfect for forever and it still won't be. I mean, I go back and listen to like episode 1 and I can just hear all the things that I would change now because I've grown a lot. And that's the thing that's like a little risky about making something that lives in perpetuity. But I don't know, it's there and it's up and people still enjoy it and people are forgiving, I think, in a lot of ways. Yeah, I don't think we make stuff to make the best thing. I think we make something. And at that moment, it was like a perfect reflection of what I needed to do at that time.
Mhm.
And now I have no desire to lend my voice or my writing to the show. Now, being producing and sort of shaping the outlines of the show, encouraging writers to really, really figure out who they are as a writer, getting a strong voice, coming up with the arc of an 8 episode series, and making sure that people have the resources to do that. Man, that is such a fun use of my time. So I didn't know it was going to pivot that way. So you really you have to hold on to it, but not too tightly because you
Mhm.
don't know what it's going to become. I imagine it's kind of like having a kid. You think you know what it might be like,
Yeah.
but you can't really guess, and then you just got to like roll with it.
Then as soon as you figure out one phase, you're like, oh, okay, I get this toddler. And then it grows up and you're like, wait, what? What is this thing?
I will not pretend to know what it's like to rear a human life, but I do understand that from a artistic standpoint where you're like, I thought it was going to be this thing and I guess it's this whole other thing. That's so cool that it can like live in the world. And I don't know, in like 10 years someone will be like, "Remember that awful podcast?" And I'll just be like, "Yeah, man, I don't know. That's crazy."
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, let's get into season 3. What do we have coming for fucking sober?
Well, I'm so excited. I don't know if we know Chris Marshall, but in our spaces, Chris Marshall is famous. So, Chris Marshall, we got this like, really hilarious, thoughtful person in the recovery space who has made a Sands bar in Austin, Texas. Chris has 17 years of sobriety. He is in his early 40s. I guess I maybe shouldn't out him on his actual age. I'm sure he's fine. And he owns a brick and mortar bar that is straight up a space to hang out and be that does not serve alcohol. And I think if not the first one, definitely like, staple if you're gonna like travel around the world and try to like find a Sands bar, like this is the one you want to go to. And Chris Marshall is a Black man in Austin, Texas, who started this bar.
Mm.
And Chris has a really interesting story that you will learn on your own when you hear this, but it really, really excessive and intense alcohol abuse at a very early age in a very compressed time. This man earned his seat, let me tell you, but really cleaned his act up and by 23 had kicked it in and now is a living, breathing example for all of us. 17 years later, has a family, successful, has helped hundreds of other entrepreneurs and other sober people in the sober space, let alone just by living, being an example as somebody who can really turn it around and figure out a way to thrive. He was born to be an example.
Mm.
It's impossible to not feel better after having a conversation with Chris and have his attention. And I think it's impossible for him not to be an incredibly caring person. And so, Tawny Laura, the author of Dry Humping, which
Mhm.
is a book that came out this year about looking at your own relationship with alcohol and sex and dating, both for the sober curious and sober humans, introduced me to Chris, and Chris had heard Fucking Sober and said, "Man, let's do this." So we are in the
Wow.
process of crafting, and what Chris is so he's able to like pull out these stories from his life, he mine his own life for these stories in a way that has just been so fun. And again, talk about like, I don't know quite what it is yet, or I didn't quite know what it was yet. And then you just let someone take the reins and you will, beyond your wildest dreams.
Oh, I love it. I cannot wait. I did get to meet Chris briefly through Clubhouse when we were all hanging out there, and I
Yeah,
heard
that's
I
right.
heard a bit of his journey starting the Sands Bar, and yeah, very inspiring human. And I don't know his story yet, so I'm so, so, so excited to hear it. And I love the way these stories come to life on Fucking Sober. Where can the 424 listeners go and check this out and hear your first 2 seasons and get connected?
Well, you can always find us on our website, fckingsober.com. podcast.com. But you could probably just search us on Apple Podcast. There's an F asterisk. There's no U for those of us who haven't put it all together. CKING, fucking sober, should pop up. It has a shadow ban on it, which I like. I was not in the podcasting world and having that name. So you might have to do a little bit of hunting, but you can find it literally anywhere you can get your podcasts. Also, you can follow us on Instagram, FCKING90_podcast, which is slightly different than a couple of other podcasting accounts, or sorry, Instagram accounts out there. But basically, we try to keep it as like an informational spot, and places if you need to reach out to us. But it's not really, we don't really engage too much on social media, but we love when people leave responses and reviews on Apple Podcast or on Spotify. It sort of has this prompt of like, what did you like about this episode? Oh my goodness. Some of y'all have left hilarious and hyper personal things. And we just want to say thank you so much for relating to so much of Anita and Betsy's journey. And we hope that Chris's journey, and then we have 2 other seasons in the works, will resonate with you also.
Beautiful. And before I let you go, can you share with us some things that you do to celebrate sober?
When I really want to celebrate sober, I will do something really nice for myself, some healthy things like go on a walk or go on a run or something. But when I really want to celebrate, sometimes I do like a pie tour, meaning I'll pie hop. We used to bar hop, so I'm a very social person. I like to pie hop. And so a way to like get to know my neighborhood or the new city I'm in, I'm nomadic, is I will go pie hopping. And so one way that I love to explore the neighborhood and to celebrate being sober and social and out in the world is pie hopping.
I love that so much. It's actually an answer I haven't heard before. So that is
Oh,
brilliant.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it just also shows that we're working on a little bit of our sugar addiction. But that's it. Just lightly, lightly. You don't have to finish the pie either. You can take a couple of bites. But I'm just saying, like, Texas does their pecan pie right. I'm just saying.
Well, hopefully with the help of Chris, there's going to be Sands bars all over the place soon that we can like sober bar hop to for those of us who don't pie.
That is so, and in New York, you sort of can, which is kind of amazing. And even these days, I mean, you can pop from bar to bar. I mean, you have to sort of figure out how you feel in normal bar spaces, but
Yeah.
God, thank goodness for the sort of sober movement and non-alcoholic movement. I finally feel like I can do things normally.